Calliditas announced this month that the FDA requires 3 more months to review the submission of Nefecon. Dan, what does this mean?
That's a very good question. Indeed, there have been lots of delays recently for companies trying to get their drugs to the market, mainly because of the corona situation. So we tried to find out in an interview with Calliditas CEO what are the underlying reasons for Calliditas and where the company stands today.
Welcome, everyone. We are pleased to have Calliditas CEO René Lucander with us today to go a bit through the recent events that have impacted the Calliditas Therapeutics stock. And just as an introduction, can you elaborate maybe which kind of disease you're treating and which type of patients you're addressing?
Sure. So our lead candidate, Nefecon, is targeting IgA nephropathy, which is a chronic autoimmune disease of the kidney. It's an orphan disease, and there's no kind of approved treatments there today. And that's really kind of the target population that we are addressing, is basically those kind of patients who are diagnosed with IgA nephropathy and who continue to progress towards end-stage renal disease and then would end up in dialysis or transplantation.
Okay, thank you. And so we recently heard that the FDA has requested some additional data on the eGFR, so the kidney filtration rate, which is in the end what patients care about. And if we look at the clinical data that you have published so far, it has been clinically meaningful. You have halted disease progression at 9 months. You had a high statistical significance on that data as well. Could you share with us a bit the confidence you have in the data produced in terms of eGFR?
Sure. So this is data that is not new data. So it's data that's part of the submission that we made in March, but it's additional analysis that the division has asked for. And so with regards to eGFR, I mean, obviously, we feel that we have a very robust data package across all kind of relevant metrics. And so, from our perspective, actually, this extension of the review period, even though it clearly can be thought that this is, disappointing and annoying in a variety of ways, it's actually, from our perspective, quite good news because the priority review period is very, very short. It's only about 5 months. And it is the very first time that the FDA is reviewing a file on the basis of this endpoint. And so the fact that there is additional information that they want to look at, if they want to be more conscientious, look into more details, then obviously we still see that as a positive thing.
Yeah, I think we agree on that point as well. And one question that came up sometimes is considering the enrollment criteria also in your clinical trials, could it be important to start treating the patients early to max out the effect of the drug, or did you not really see a correlation in terms of treatment effect, whether you start early or a bit later?
So obviously in the phase 2b trial, those patients were less sick generally than what they were in the phase 3. So the phase 3 had more sick patients generally. And this is obviously driven to some extent by the KDIGO guidelines, so to a large extent by that. But in terms of the effects that we were seeing in the phase 2b, we looked obviously, across different baselines of proteinuria. And we would basically say that, there is clearly a benefit both for low and high, kind of high baseline kind of proteinuria patients. And in terms of treatment, obviously the kidney is not kind of regenerating. And so obviously once you lose your kidney functions, once these kind of filtration mechanisms, the glomeruli, once they have kind of become necrotic and no longer functioning, I mean, there's no way of actually getting them back. So obviously from that perspective, you would always like to keep obviously as much of your kidney function as possible, rather than wait until you are getting, very close to end-stage renal disease to give any treatment.
Yeah. And how do you see the treatment landscape evolving? Currently, there are no approved treatments. So that's, to my knowledge, there are only steroids, for instance, used. And other drugs are in the pipeline, which will come quite a bit later than your drug, if approved in December. How do you see the treatment evolving for these patients in the coming years?
So I think that obviously, as always, I think we have to wait and see what the other treatments actually have in terms of effect and safety. Once we actually start, it's quite difficult to kind of guess too much once we, because we don't really know what the profile of other drugs are because they're obviously in trials. But in general, I would say that, from this kind of patient population's perspective, I think that it's good news that there are several drug candidates in development. Most likely, generally you would say that it would be unlikely that all of them would make it, but certainly some of them you would expect to be approved. And I think it's always good to have a variety of different options for patients depending on where they are in the treatment paradigm. And so I think that, having combinations of different drugs is something that we're seeing more and more, particularly in autoimmune diseases. And so I guess from a patient perspective, I would see that as a good thing that, physicians can combine different approaches depending on what the need of the patient really is. But from our perspective, obviously, we're really looking forward to hopefully getting approved under this review cycle, as there is a really significant unmet medical need. And obviously every year that goes by, more and more people end up in dialysis and transplantation. And we would kind of hope to be addressing that patient population sooner rather than later. And there's obviously always a benefit in terms of being first in trying to actually address a significant unmet medical need. And so I think this is really something where I believe we have an opportunity to really establish ourselves as the kind of backbone treatment for patients really at risk of end-stage renal disease.
That sounds very exciting. And till to date, you're the only company with the only drug that has reported the data on eGFR in later stage trials. And patients are obviously excited about that. And what could you elaborate or share with us in terms of the effects also that you've seen after 9 months of treatment?
So in terms of the after 9 months, we have to be quite careful in terms of what we share publicly, because obviously there's a limitation. But the regulators aren't keen really with us sharing much information at all. And also I think that we want to really stick to the kind of endpoints where we have the full population really there, because otherwise you start getting too much kind of you're getting a smaller number obviously of patients as you look further out. But obviously one of the things that we have mentioned is obviously proteinuria is the surrogate marker and the endpoint in this trial. And what's important, obviously, is to ensure that just as we saw in the phase 2b, that actually, even though we stop the dosing of this drug, that there is a continued benefit for patients beyond the 9 months of treatment. And that is something where we've seen, obviously, in the phase 3 as well, the proteinuria, which is, which is kind of the endpoint here, that continues to see a significant improvement with regards to treatment effect, even without, without the drug being administered. And this, I think, is key just in terms of the mode of action that we have, which is not we're not trying to treat systemically. We're not trying to really address, the inflammation of the kidney, but really trying to really focus on the origin of the disease and thereby kind of reducing, all of these kind of complexes that they will deposit in the kidney. And if we do that, to such an extent that the kidney can clear the deposits and function much better, then obviously that is a benefit, that should be sustained beyond kind of the actual dosing regimen, which is why we're very encouraged by seeing these trends, even if those are not in the entire population.
Yeah, well, that's very promising. And from that, could we kind of derive that there are still quite a number of patients that want to stay on treatment and physicians wanting to continue treating them?
So I think that this will be a very individual choice from different physicians, because obviously this is a heterogeneous disease. So maybe there are patients who are not progressing very rapidly, whilst other patients really might be progressing very rapidly or have very high levels of proteinuria where you really, really feel that it's key and critical to reduce that proteinuria as much as possible. And that obviously might lead to the fact that certain physicians would like to keep some patients on drug for a longer period of time, whilst other physicians would probably prefer to kind of have a certain treatment period. They follow these patients anyway on about a 3-monthly basis. They see them 3 to 4 times a year. There's plenty of opportunity for them to follow these patients in terms of proteinuria and eGFR. And if these kind of curves start kind of going in the wrong direction, they would then, give another kind of treatment cycle to those patients. So I think that there is an opportunity for both. And I think it really will depend on the individual profile of the patient as to kind of what the physician believes would be the best approach.
Okay, thank you very much. And one last question, considering you're now getting quite close to your potential approval date in December, how are the commercial preparations going?
Well, so absolutely, we're obviously ready. We were ready to kind of, from a commercial perspective, on the basis of having an approval in the middle of September. This gives us an opportunity really to kind of fine tune some of these preparations, put some more of these kind of things in place with regards to disease education, really kind of building the market in terms of information, and really building a pipeline as well in terms of physicians, in advance of a potential approval. So there's plenty of things still for us to do, but I think both our market access and our commercial marketing, et cetera, certainly I think is well poised, for a successful launch in December.
So it would be fair to conclude that you can use these additional 3 months to just increase the pipeline of physicians, or you're using it for that?
Absolutely, and I think there's still a lot of nephrologists, obviously, who don't think that it's not, it doesn't come naturally necessarily. It's a rare disease. It's not something that they do every day, and the whole kind of gut renal, axis, this connection between the gut and the kidney in this particular disease, I think something that physicians obviously, they find it very interesting. Is not something that they necessarily are aware of, and so I think there's plenty of kind of work that we can do in order to kind of prepare the market and educate nephrologists in advance of a product launch.
Sounds very promising. Thank you very much for your time, Renee. And thank you everyone for listening in. Thank you.
Thanks.